your mind is incredibly powerful, but it will still reliably trap you in the wrong solution, lead you to the wrong decision, and make it harder for you to explain ideas and communicate with other people. So today we're going to see why that happens, and we're going to see how you can fix it. So before we get into that, I just want to kind of give you a foreshadowing of what we're going to be talking about today. So this is an illustration of Buridan's donkey, which is a paradox in reasoning. And this was a way of critiquing a way of reasoning that was proposed as being a rational way of reasoning. So we're going to talk about rationality, but basically, what rationality, the way that you can think of it, the way that it's defined is that everything else being equal, if you choose the better option, that is the rational decision. So if you were a donkey and you were a rational decision maker and you had to choose between two bales of hay, you would choose, for example, the bigger bale of hay. But what if both bales of hay were exactly the same size? Then you might choose the closer bale of hay. That would be the rational choice. But Buridan's paradox asks, well, what would happen to a rational decision maker if they were equidistant from equally sized bales of hay and everything about them was equal? And according to theories of rationality, that donkey would just remain in the center there and starve to death. So that illustrates one thing that we're going to be focusing on today, which is the discrepancy between what is proposed to be rational and then what a human being or other cognitive entity might actually do, might actually behave. Because this typically wouldn't happen, but when I was doing research for today's meeting, I remembered this clip. So if you think this would never happen, you've never met this dog. So this was the challenge about a year ago where dog owners would run away from their dog in opposite directions, and you would do it as a test to see who the dog loved more. And in this case, this is about as much of a real life example of Buridan's donkey as I've ever seen. So let's check it out. So you have them setting up the challenge, and they run in opposite directions. And now the dog is faced with a choice. Who does it love more? Who's closer? Does it love them equally? Well, it looks like it does love them equally. And it literally just spins. The dog literally just spins around and around. So this is going to be not necessarily the way that our human mind works, but this is going to be the setup for understanding how our human mind works. Because what we're going to see today is that psychologists and mathematicians and logicians, they come up with definitions of reality. Then psychologists go out and they figure out what do humans actually do. And then the cognitive psychologists step in and figure out why. Why does human behavior deviate from rationality? So the outline today, we're going to do a quick recap on what a problem is. And then we're going to finish our look at what makes problems difficult. So we didn't get the functional fixedness last time. And we're also going to take a look at mental sets this time. And then we're going to take a look at human reasoning. We're going to talk about normative versus descriptive reasoning. Spoiler alert, normative, what you're supposed to do, descriptive, what we actually do. And then we're going to take a look at what the Wason selection task tells us about how we reason, and also what is the most effective way to change somebody else's mind when they hold when you're trying to introduce a new concept or a new idea to them. So just a quick recap. What is a problem? For a cognitive psychologist, a problem requires two things. There's an obstacle between your present state and the goal, obstacle between where you are and where you want to be, and not immediately obvious how to get around that obstacle. Not immediately obvious how to go from your present state to your goal. So last time we gave the examples of wordies. And if you recall, this wordie here, we didn't have many people correctly solve it. So your goal state is seeing your initial state is seeing the wordie. Your goal state is solving it, not immediately clear how to do that. That makes it a problem. Eventually, we came to discover that it is space invaders is the phrase. And then that is the solution to the problem. But that leads us into the idea of, well, what makes these problems difficult? What are some of these obstacles between the present state and a goal that actually make it not obvious how to get around the obstacle? Well, one of the basic ideas, and we covered this last time, so just a quick recap. One of the basic ideas is that to solve any problem, you need to restructure how you represent the problem, and the solution comes out from that restructuring. So we need to represent a problem somehow in our mind in order to even think about it. But that representation might make solving the problem easier. And if it does, then we end up with our solution. Or it might make it impossible or possible. If it makes it impossible, then that problem becomes extremely difficult. And the example we had for restructuring was this problem right here, where you have to determine the number of the parking space that's containing the car. And with this representation here, it is extremely difficult. You are in your present state, which is seeing those numbers there, 16, 6, 68, 88. You want your goal state of discovering what is the number underneath the car, but it's not obvious how you can get from your present state to the goal state because of the representation that was given to you. If you restructure that representation, then all of a sudden that obstacle is removed. Now it's immediately obvious how to get to your goal. It's 86 space 88, 89, 90. Clearly the number now is 87, and you have solved that problem through restructuring your representation of that problem. So what about some of the other things that make obstacles or that create these obstacles between your present state and the goal that make these problems difficult? So the first one we're going to take a look at is functional fixedness. And what functional fixedness is, it's where our minds restrict the use of an object to its familiar functions. So this is, again, a way of representing the problem. We have certain tools or objects we can use to solve the problem, and we represent those objects in terms of their familiar functions. And oftentimes that leads us to be unable to solve the problem until we restructure those representations and do non-familiar functions with those objects. So I'll give you a kind of typical example first. So here we have a woman eating with a fork, and we all know what forks are for. They're to get food from your plate to your mouth. That is the typical function of a fork. That's what forks are for. And when we represent the idea of a fork, we also represent dysfunction. Forks are for eating. But if you've ever seen one of these life hack videos that tells you either 20 ways to use a fork that you've never thought of, or the ones that I find annoying, you've been using a fork wrong your entire life. But either way, this is literally just a example of a video of ways to use a fork that breaks functional fixedness. Some of them to more of a degree than others. I mean, this is using a fork as a fork, but using a fork to help you with sewing, not the typical function. Using a fork to balance eggs, not the typical function. Using a fork to hem a dress, not the typical function. So if you needed to solve the problem of how to hem a dress and with pleats, and you had a fork with you, and all you could think of was, well, forks are for eating, you would never solve that problem of how to hem that dress. So that's an example of functional fixedness and the breaking of functional fixedness. So that is one of the ways to help you solve your problems, because solving a problem, if you use the most common representations and the problem remains, oftentimes you need to use new representations of the objects that you have at your disposal in order to solve that problem. So the failure to solve the problem comes from a failure to use certain representations that are available, but are just not being activated by your mind. So I'll give you another example here to give you another kind of look at functional fixedness. So if you've ever watched cartoons and you've seen somebody get thrown through a wall and they leave that impression there, you know exactly how that person went through the wall. You know where their head went, right? So that area right there, that's where their head went. This is where their arm went through the wall. This is where their other arm went through the wall. This is where their leg went through the wall. This is where their other leg went through the wall. So that cartoon gag has given us the functional fixedness, the typical representation of how that person went through that wall. So that typical representation allows us to solve the problem of, well, how did they fit through the wall? Well, I know how they fit through the wall. The head went there, the legs went over there. That's how they went through the wall. So I bring that up because we're going to take a look at a Japanese game show that basically used functional fixedness to make it difficult to do this game. So the game I think it was brought to America. It was called Hole in the Wall. Basically, the game is for a contestant to somehow contort their body to fit through the hole in the wall that is coming toward them. Otherwise, they're going to get pushed into the pool. So we're going to take a look at some successes and some failures. And what I want you to do is pay attention to who is successful and who fails, specifically who fails when they use functional fixedness and who succeeds when they break functional fixedness.
ルールは簡単。プレイヤーは様々な形にくり抜かれた壁を的確なポーズですり抜けられると10ポイント獲得。しかし抜けられない場合は壁に敵と哀れみ水の中へ。頑張って頑張って。お楽勝。さあコンビ愛コンビ愛。手なんかいらないで多分。手いらないんだ。ああいいアドバイスだったいいアドバイスだったさあコンビ愛。息の合ったところどうか。無理だ。これ難しいね。さあよく考えて。どう使ってさあどうか。抜けたクリア。予想している。さあこの形。さあこれは難しそうだ。弾丸ジャッキいけない？さあ弾丸ジャッキいけるか？どうする？どうする？おっとしゃがみ弾丸ジャッキ消えた。いやただ脳を使って脳を使ってさあ脳を使ってこの形脳を使ってこの形行くんですけどね弱ドライブですこれはドライブのイメージですさあ文字像どうする文字像
All right, so there we had some failures, we had some successes. So did anybody notice any patterns in terms of when they succeeded and when they failed? Anything pop out at anyone? Yep.
I feel like they succeeded when they did try and make the exact shape that was like anyone.
So they did a lot of times succeed when they did not try to make the exact shape that was on the board. That was actually one of the main ways to succeed because making the exact shape that was shown on the board was falling for functional fixedness. It was basically saying, well, I see the shape on the board. I see the human outline. So I know where my body is supposed to go in that human outline. And those were more likely to fail than if they broke that functional fixedness. So let's start with an example where there was no functional fixedness. So we'll take a look at this one here. So in this hole in the wall, we have this shape here, and there's nothing human about this shape. There's no outline that looks like the head. There's no outline that looks like the legs. There's no outline that looks like the arms. So we just represent this as the hole that it is, and we don't put any sort of functions on where our body has to go through that hole. So this individual here was able to come up with a shape and say, all right, well, there's no reason for me to put my head or my legs or any other part of my body anywhere. So I am going to solve this problem by putting my body in the best shape possible to make it through that particular opening. If you contrast that with one where they failed, so this was one that ended in failure. And if you take a look at this hole here, this is a little pixelated. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but this is basically an outline of like a baby doing a vote pose, I would imagine. So a baby that was into Pilates. But it is very, it's got human features to this outline. So we have that hole right there, or that part of the hole. That's where the head goes. And this part, that's where your legs go. And you can see where the arms are supposed to go. So this outline is a human-shaped outline. And if you represent it in terms of its typical functions, then you know where your head is supposed to go. You know where your legs are supposed to go. And that's what this individual tried to do. And they actually failed to pass this particular challenge. Now, one of the reasons why I really like this one too is because the game show actually shows you how to solve this problem. And the solution is right there. So we'll zoom in a little bit on it. And what you need to do is you need to break functional fixedness. And you need to say, all right, I'm going to lie down on the floor with my legs in a V shape spread apart so that my head is right there. So I'm going to break the functional fixedness of my butt needs to go through that part of the hole. And I'm going to say, no, 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 I'm going to give it a new function. That's where my head is going to go. And the neck and the feet, that's where my knees are going to go. So my neck's not going to go in the typical place. My neck is now going to go where the butt is. My knees are going to go where the neck is. You redefine the functions, not using the typical ones. And that would be the way to solve this particular hole. And then one of my favorite ones is this one right here. So once again, we have a human silhouette. We have a human outline. And we know the functions of these holes in the wall. That is where your head is supposed to go. That is where your legs are supposed to go. So in this hole here, you know exactly the kind of shape that you would need to contort into to put your head where your head is supposed to go, to put your legs where your legs are supposed to go. And I just love the solution where he tried to represent it like that at the beginning, realized it wasn't going to work, and then just threw functional fixedness out the window, said, well, I'm going to use new functions for these particular holes, and just stepped right through. This was like the easiest physically one to solve. And he just was like, yeah, I'm just going to step through this. I'm going to put my legs where the butt is supposed to be. I'm not going to put my arms at all where the arms are supposed to be. And it was immediately, it was incredibly easy to solve. So that's the idea of functional fixedness. So take home kind of piece of advice for that is, if you're having difficulty solving a problem, one of the things that you can try to do is think about the tools that you have and how you're using those tools, and ask yourself, is there a different way to use them? Because oftentimes when we run into a problem, we continue to be unable to solve it because we continue to use our tools in the same way that we've been doing it before. And that means that we are fixed in terms of their function. We're falling for functional fixedness. So sometimes if you can break out of that, then you can successfully solve the problem. All right. So the next one, in terms of what makes problems difficult, why can we not immediately get around the obstacle? Well, the next one has to do with the phenomenon of mental sets. And people oftentimes have preconceived notions on how to solve a problem. And oftentimes those notions are reinforced during the solving of the problem, and you end up creating a mental set. So a nice example of that is the eggs in a basket riddle. So I'll give you this riddle and give you maybe like 20 seconds to try to solve it. It's pretty straightforward. There are 6 eggs in a basket. 6 people take one of the eggs each. No eggs are added to the basket. How is it that 1 egg can still be left in the basket? So 6 eggs in a basket. 6 people take one of the eggs each. No eggs are added to the basket. How is it at the end of all this, 1 egg can still be left in the basket? All right, so I'll give you a little bit of time to try to solve it. Do you think you have a solution, or are you asking for clarification?
Yes.
You got okay. So we'll hang on to that. All right. So how many think that they solved the problem? Hands up if you think you got a solution. All right, we got one. So everybody else still struggling with it. So this is clearly a problem because we have an end state. How is it that one egg is still left in the basket? We have our initial state. Egg is full. 6 people take one each. We don't know how to get from one to the other. That makes it a problem. So what do you think the solution is? What was that? The basket belongs to somebody. So what happened with that last egg?
The one person didn't listen. They didn't message.
Exactly. So the solution to this, and we'll take a look at it, is that the way that this worked is that that last person did something different than the other 5 people. That's the only way to solve this problem, is that the last person that takes an egg does something different than the other people. And the reason this is difficult is because of mental sets. So we'll set it up here. This is a schematic of the basket. Here are your 6 eggs. And what you do when you solve this problem is you start to navigate the problem and measure mentally, am I getting closer or am I not getting closer? So much like the connectionist networks, where they were learning how to play those video games, and they would get closer to a higher score, and they would be like, oh, okay, I'm going to keep doing that. But if they got further away from a high score, they would say, okay, no, I'm not going to do that. Your mind does the same thing. So your mind starts out with this problem and says, all right, step number 1, person 1 takes an egg. And we know our end game. We want to end up with every person has an egg, but there's 1 egg left in the basket. So we're now at 0 people have eggs. We want to get to 6 people have eggs. So we say, all right, person 1 takes an egg. So there goes person 1, and they take their egg. And you say to yourself, well, okay, I want 6 people with eggs. I used to have 0 people with eggs and 6 eggs in a basket. Now I have 1 person with an egg. I'm actually closer to a solution. Taking an egg was a good move. So what do? You say, well, let's do that again. And you say person number 2 takes an egg. And then cognitively, you're thinking about this and you say, all right, well, now I got 2 people with eggs and 4 left in the basket. I'm now even closer. Second person taking an egg was a good thing to do. And you say, all right, well, let's just keep doing it. It's worked so far. We'll just keep doing it. So third person takes an egg, and that makes you more likely for your next move to be fourth person takes an egg. And that makes it more likely that you get fixated on the idea of just taking eggs. So the fifth person takes an egg. And now that makes it more likely that when you get to that 6th person, you're only going to think of taking an egg, because taking an egg out of the basket has worked 5 times. 5 times you've been successful in getting closer to the solution of the problem. So you have now fallen into a mental set so that you're blocked, because now you're thinking, okay, well, 6, we're going to do the same thing. 6th person takes an egg. Well, wait a second. Then the basket will be empty. There's got to be 1 egg left in the basket. So what am I supposed to do? Well, what did I do the first 5 times? Everybody took an egg. All right, great. 6th person takes an egg. Well, wait a second. That means there's not going to be an egg left in the basket. I need 1 egg left in the basket. So you fall into that mental set instead of realizing that the way to solve the problem is that the 6th person takes the egg, but they take the basket with them. So this is the owner of the basket. They take the basket, they've taken an egg, and yet there's still an egg in the basket. So mental sets oftentimes happen when either you have a preconceived notion of how to approach a problem, or you've been successful in the early stages of a problem applying a certain strategy, and then that makes the later strategies very difficult to implement. So this is one of the ones where if you do things based on, for example, tradition, then oftentimes you can fall into a mental set, and that might make new problems difficult to solve. So if you're doing something and the reason you do it is because this is always the way that it's been done, then that is a clue that is your sort of red flag to say to yourself, well, wait a second, have I fallen into a mental set? Or, do I need to take a look at my strategies and maybe change them up? And this is one of the reasons why, as a professor, one of the things that we are always looking for is how to improve our teaching, how to improve our pedagogy, how do we make what we do more effective, how do we enhance your learning better. And one of the ways to do that is to go to what they call best practices. So you go to the things that people have tried, people have done over and over and over and over again. And a lot of professors swear up and down on best practices, and in my opinion, go too far into best practices because things change, education changes, environment changes, society changes, and oftentimes the best practices become that part of a mental set. And you get to the point where, well, we're doing it this way because we've always done it this way. So every once in a while, when I'm doing kind of reworkings of my course, I like to check in on best practices. It's good to be educated, but every once in a while, I always say to myself, well, what if I do something like this? What if I do this different thing? Let's give it a try, because sometimes you just need to grab that whole basket, try something weird, try something different. And that is the way to actually move forward and solve these problems. All right. So the last one that we had, or that we looked at already, was incubation effects. So we saw this last time when none of us were able to solve Space Invaders the first time we saw it. But after discussing other things, we were able to come back, and then one person was able to solve Space Invaders. So that was an example of incubation effects. When you step away from a problem after being unsuccessful at attempting to solve it, and then that leads to a quick solution, either when you return to the problem or when you're in the shower. Those are the two places where it usually happens. So we talked about this a little bit, but I'm just going to reframe it in terms of what we discussed. Why does this occur? Why is incubation effects a thing? Well, part of it has to do with restructuring. So what incubation effects are based on, our best explanation of them is that they make you forget the things that you were stuck on, the strategies that you were stuck on, the representations that you were stuck on when you were trying to solve the problem. And they allow you to try new things that are more likely to help you solve the problem, because for sure, the stuff that you were trying already has a 0 probability chance of solving the problem because it has failed. So something new needs to be done, but our minds often get stuck. So when you walk away from a solution and come back, you might have incubation effects because of restructuring. You might come back and say, you know what? I've been looking at this problem right way up this whole time. Let me flip it upside down. Let me try that. Oh my gosh, there it is. There's that parking spot number. So you might restructure just naturally. You're not really thinking of doing it, but you kind of forgot, put it out of your mind what you're doing before, and you just stumble upon that new way of thinking about it. Same thing with functional fixedness. You go away, you're not thinking about how to use a fork, you're not thinking about how to get through that hole in the wall. And then when you come back, it's not guaranteed, but you are more likely to try something new when you come back. And that something new is what is needed. And then lastly, with mental set as well, you're on that 6th egg, you just can't figure it out. So you step away and you forget about your first 5 moves. You forget about taking the egg, taking the egg, taking the egg, taking the egg, taking the egg. You come back, you see the basket, and you're like, hey, what if I take the basket? Oh my gosh, that's the solution. And it's not because you've been subconsciously working on these things. It's because you allowed your mind to deactivate those representations that were making the problem difficult, which allowed it to activate a representation that allowed you to solve that particular problem. All right, so that's what I wanted to cover for problem solving and creativity. Any questions before we move on to judgment and decision making? All right. So now that we're going to move on to judgment and decision making, the what we've seen so far is that functional fixedness, mental sets, representations show that once you represent a problem in a certain way, it becomes very, very difficult to see it differently. And that doesn't just affect problem solving, but it also affects decision making as well. Because once you approach a decision, you're not going to evaluate it objectively. You're going to evaluate it through the representation of the situation that you have. And if that representation is off, your decision is going to be off. So we're going to look at one of the most famous examples of that, which is the Wason card selection task. But before we get there, we need to lay some groundwork. So this is what we're going to be looking at, not deductive reasoning, that snuck in there. We're going to take a look at human reasoning, normative, what we're supposed to do versus descriptive, and then we'll take a look at the Cog Lab and what it says about how to introduce new ideas to people so that they're maximally likely to accept those new ideas. All right, so let's start with human reasoning. So human reasoning is considered to be one of the hallmarks of human cognition. It's one of the things that we believe makes us special. And I think that's one of the reasons why the pushback on AI has been so strong in certain areas, because if AI can reason, we start to lose that, what makes a mind a human mind. But human reasoning definitely is one of the things that sets us apart from other minds that currently exist. And this is something that develops from childhood. And it's not something that we're born with, but it's something that these representations and strategies, they do develop over time. So we're going to take a look at a nice example of that when we take a look at two children at two different ages trying to solve the same logic reasoning puzzle. So we're going to start off with a young individual trying to solve a problem that was given to them by their, in this case, psychology researcher.
It says, if you hit a glass with a hammer, the glass will break.
I knew that.
And then this one says, Don hit a glass with a hammer.
I knew that too.
So what happened to the glass?
It broke
It broke. Why did it break?
because the hammer's hard.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
No, it won't.
And this is the second rule. Don hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
Nothing.
Nothing happened. Why didn't anything happen?
Because the feather's soft.
First one says, if you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
Okay.
And the second one, Don hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
It broke.
And why did it break?
Because the rule says if you hit a glass with a feather, it'll break. So if you hit a glass with a feather, it broke.
All right, so this shows us two really nice examples of human reasoning. The first one is from the younger child, and that is the idea that when you are arguing with somebody, so we can take that interaction as an argument. When you're arguing with somebody, if you cannot agree on the premises of your arguments, then you have no need to continue with the argument. So when this cognitive psychologist said, oh, if you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break, and that child immediately propped up and said, no, it won't. That's where the argument ends. Until you can agree on that premises, there's no point going further. So that's just a little aside. The real reason I wanted to show this is because it shows the two aspects of human reasoning that cognitive psychologists use to try to understand how our mind works. And the first one is normative reasoning, and then the second one is descriptive reasoning. So these are two different things. Normative reasoning is how humans should reason, i.e., what is the correct thing to actually do. So in this case, we have the conditional syllogism. If you hit a glass with a feather, then the glass will break. You hit the glass with the feather. Logically, the correct normative answer is that the glass will break. Descriptive reasoning, on the other hand, is how humans actually reason. And this is what humans actually do. So in this case, descriptive reasoning for the older child would be the same as normative reasoning. The older child was able to apply the logical rules and come up with the normative reasoning solution. But the younger child differed. Their descriptive reasoning differed from the normative reasoning. They concluded the glass would not break when it was hit with a feather. Normative reasoning said it should break. So then as cognitive psychologists, we are invited in to try to explain why did that discrepancy occur. So normative reasoning is based on philosophy, logics, mathematics. It gives us our kind of baseline of what we can compare our own behavior against. And then descriptive reasoning is based on our behaviors. So again, in this example, the older child, the descriptive reasoning that she illustrated, that she showed, matched the normative reasoning. However, for the younger child, their descriptive reasoning, what they did, the feather would not break the glass, did not match the normative reasoning, what they should have concluded, the glass would break. So again, we map out what those two different aspects of reasoning are, what is logical and what is what we actually do. And then we try to determine why is it that we do the things that we do. So that brings us to our COG Lab, 12th COG Lab, the Wason selection task. So in this COG Lab, you were given a bunch of trials and you were given a rule and you were shown 4 cards. And your task was to pick 2 cards to decide if the rule was being violated. So you were like the rule police and you just had to do inspections to figure out, is the rule being violated? So you would see things like if a card has a vowel on one side, it must have an even number on the other side. And you would have to decide, do I check F to see if it has what number it has on the other side? Do I check the number 4 to see what letter it has on the other side? Do I check the number 7 to see what letter it has on the other side? Or do I check the letter E to see what number it has on the other side? Which of those 2 out of the 4 options do I need to check to make sure that this rule is being followed, to make sure that it's not being violated? So that was your challenge. Independent variable was whether the rule was abstract or whether the rule was thematic. So in an abstract rule, you cannot use knowledge of the world. In a thematic rule, you can use knowledge of the world. So in our example with the 2 children, a thematic rule would be if you hit a glass with a hammer, it will break. That is something that you can use knowledge of the real world. As that younger child said, I knew that. He said, yeah, I've seen that in the real world. I have knowledge of that in the real world. That's a thematic rule. An abstract rule would be like the feather. If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break. Can't use knowledge of the real world to solve that. Have to solve it using abstract logical ability. And the dependent variable was the mean number of correct cards chosen to test the rules. So the mean number of correct cards chosen, that tests the rules. So there's 2 correct cards. So on each trial, you could either get a score of 0. You didn't choose either of the 2 correct cards. You could get a score of 1. You chose 1 correct card, 1 incorrect card, or you could get a score of 2. You chose both correct cards. So this is an example of an abstract rule. If a card is textured on one side, it must have a cow on the other. Most people have not encountered this situation in the world. If a card has salt on one side, it must be pink on the other. This is again an abstract rule, and that's something that we are experiencing in our daily lives. And finally, this is the classic one. If a card has a vowel on one side, it must have an even number on the other. Those are the abstract examples of the abstract rules. Example of a thematic rule is something like if a person is drinking beer, that person must be 21 or older. And that is something where you can apply your daily life experience to. This is something that is in our culture, it's in our society. We might have seen examples of it on TV shows or may have fallen prey to that ourselves. But this is something you can apply real world knowledge to. Another thematic rule, if you ride your bicycle after dark, you must wear reflective clothing. And then another one that is incredibly important, if you work overtime, you must be paid extra. So anybody who has had a job where you have worked overtime knows that if you've worked overtime, you check your paycheck to make sure that you got that time and a half or double time, whatever they were supposed to pay you. But if you did not work overtime, you don't have to check your paycheck for double time or time and a half because you didn't work overtime. So you know how to navigate this based on, or you can apply real world knowledge to help you navigate this particular thematic rule. All right, so that's the setup. What did we actually do? What were the results? So here we have the results. We're going to show them in just a moment. On the x-axis there, we have the conditions for the rules, either an abstract rule or a thematic rule. And then on the y-axis, we have the mean number of correct cards chosen. So that can go all the way from 0. You missed both of them. You got completely the wrong choices made. If you chose by chance, you would choose 1 correct card on average. And then if you were a logic machine, you would get 2 cards every single time. So let's see how we actually did. So there's the performance on abstract rules. So above chance, better than we would expect if with just chance performance, but not far above chance. But rather than the absolute values, the important thing is what happens, or what is the difference between the abstract and thematic rules. And the performance on thematic rules was higher. We were more accurate when we could use help from knowledge of the world when we were reasoning than if we were just required to use our logical symbolic reasoning on its own. So abstract rules that only left us with our logical reasoning abilities, we solved those at a lower success rate than when we were able to apply knowledge of the world to answer or check these rules. So any questions about what we found in that cog lab? All right. So let's see if we have anybody that was able to go 2 for 2. So what cards should we check according to normative reasoning? So if you're asked, if P then Q, so that's the form of each of these rules. If you are drinking alcohol, you need to be over 21. If a card has a vowel on one side, it has an even number on the other side. Does anybody know which 2 cards you're supposed to check? Okay, so this is a nice example of normative reasoning, because normatively, as we're going to see, human beings don't know the answer to this. And unless you've taken a logic course, you probably do not know the abstract answer for this. So I'm just going to give it to you because this is a good thing to just carry around in your pocket to help you solve some of these when things do get a little bit abstract. Or if you're trying to do this logic in a new situation, so you've never been in this particular situation before and you don't have any previous knowledge to draw on, if somebody gives you an if P then Q statement and you need to make sure that it's not being violated, you check P and you check not Q. So you determine what is P and you determine what is Q, and you check P and you check not Q, and that'll make you perfect in the solution of this. And we'll see that when we take up the specifics of the cog lab. So we didn't do that. Just in this class right now, we didn't do that. So clearly, we violated normative reasoning. So now the question becomes, well, how did we violate normative reasoning? What was it that what were the mistakes that we were actually making? What is the difference between normative reasoning? You choose P and you choose not Q. You check the P card, you check the not Q card. And descriptive reasoning, what did we actually do? So for this, we need to go back to the original Wason selection task data. So the question that they used, the classic one, was if a card has a vowel on one side, then it is blue on the other side. And this was back in the days where pre-computers, so they actually had these cards printed up and done. And that was the choices. So what should we do logically? And why is that the logical move to make? So let's take each of these cards one at a time. So premise number 1, this is the rule. So we're gonna break this down in classic logical syllogism form. Premise number 1, if a card has a vowel on one side, then it is blue on the other side. So again, just to remind you, if you are arguing with somebody, they have to accept your premises Otherwise, you don't carry forward with the argument. If they do not accept, oh yeah, if a card has a vowel on one side, then it's blue on the other side. If they tell you that's not true, then your argument takes a step back and you have to convince them of that premise. Again, that's just an aside, but I've seen it so much in our current society, people not knowing how to argue effectively with each other, that I feel compelled to bring it up. Anyways, premise number one, if a card has a vowel on one side, then it's blue on the other side. Premise number two, the card has a vowel on one side. So we know that if it has a vowel on one side, it has to have blue on the other side. This card has a vowel. So if it follows the rule, it'll have blue on the other side. And that would indicate that the rule is valid. So if we flip it over and we see blue on the other side, we can say, hey, this card follows the rule. It had a vowel on one side, it has blue on the other side. Importantly, however, is that it can also disprove the rule. So if we take a look at that vowel and we flip it over and the card is red on the other side, then we take a look at this and we say, well, hey, wait a second. Our rule said if you have a vowel on one side, then you're blue on the other side. This card has a vowel on one side. It's supposed to be blue on the other side. It's not. It's red. The rule is invalid. The rule is being violated. And that is why the only conclusion, logical conclusion possible from those two premises is that the card is blue on the other side. So if premise number one is true and premise number two is true, then the card has to be blue on the other side. And if you're having a dinner party and a logician comes by, you can say, oh yes, the card is blue on the other side. That is affirming the antecedent. So this is checking P. Card has a vowel on one side. That is if P. We check P. Card has a vowel on one side. If card is blue on the other side, that is affirming the antecedent. So far, so good? All right. If a card has a vowel on one side, then it is blue on the other side. So let's see what happens if we now check the red card. Okay, so blue on the other side, that is Q. Q is blue on the other side. Red is not blue on the other side. Red is not Q. So let's see why that is the correct card to choose. So the card is red on one side. So we take that card, and let's say that we flip it over and we find a K. Well, that means that the rule is valid because K is a consonant, and this rule says nothing about consonants. Consonant cards can do whatever they want. They could have red on one side. They could have blue on the other side. They could have whatever color they want on the other side. This is only about vowels. So if we see a consonant on the other side, it does not matter what the color actually is. The rule is still being followed because the rule is only about vowels. So if we flip this and we see a K, perfectly fine. The rule is valid. However, if we flip it and we see an E, then we take a look at our rule and say, whoa, hang on a sec. There's an E on one side. There's supposed to be blue on that other side, according to the rule. So we can say, hey, the rule is invalid. The conclusion of these two premises is that the card does not have a vowel on the other side, and that logical structure is called denying the consequent. So importantly, again, notice that when we flip the red card, if we find a vowel on one side, it gives us one conclusion. Rule is invalid. If we find a consonant on the other side, it gives us another conclusion. The rule is valid. So it gives us different conclusions based on what we find on the other side, and that is why those are the cards we should flip. So let's see why we're not supposed to flip other cards. So if a card has a vowel on one side, then it is blue on the other side. What happens if we flip the blue card? So let's say that we flip the blue card and we turn it over and there's an E. And we say to ourselves, aha, yes, if it's a vowel on one side, like an E, it has to be blue on the other side. It is. The rule has been followed. The rule is valid. So that lets us know that the rule so far is valid. But what happens in the other case? What happens when we flip that card over and we find a K. We find a consonant. Well, in this case, we say, aha, we find a consonant. What does the rule say about consonants? It says nothing. The rule is about vowels. It says nothing about consonants. Consonants can do whatever they want. So in this case, this evidence lets us know that the rule is valid. Nothing's been violated. So the key here is that when we flip over the blue card, regardless of what we find on the other side, it's not going to violate the rule. Because if we find a vowel, it fits the rule. But if we find a consonant, the rule is not about consonants. So it still fits the rule. So we might be tempted because we see, oh, if a vowel on one side, then it's blue on the other side. We might be tempted to check the blue one. But in reality, whatever we find on the other side tells us nothing. So this is actually a logical fallacy. The card has a vowel on the other side is a conclusion that is incorrect. And this occurs so often that it gets its own name. This is called affirming the consequent. This is a wrong way of thinking logically. This is contrasting to normative reason. All right, last one. What should we do logically? If a card has a vowel on one side, then it is blue on the other side. Let's say that we choose the card that does not have a vowel on one side. We choose that F, and we flip that F. It sounds worse. We flip the F, and we see that it's red, and we say to ourselves, all right, well, what does the rule say about it? Oh, it says nothing, because the rule is just about vowels. So the rule wasn't violated. The rule is still valid. But what if we take that F and we flip it over and we see a blue backing to it? Well, again, we take a look at the rule and we say, oh, it's about vowels. It's not about consonants. So a consonant can do whatever it wants. The rule is still valid. So if we think that the conclusion should be the card is not blue on the other side, we have made a logical mistake. That's a logical fallacy, and that's called denying the antecedent. So as you can see in this kind of breakdown of the problem, for any conditional, for any if P then Q, you should check P. You should check that vowel, make sure that it's blue on the other side. That is the affirming the antecedent. And you should check not Q. You check that red card and make sure that it's not a vowel on the other side. And that is called denying the consequent. That is what we should do. That is normative reasoning. That's what the logicians and mathematicians would come and say, that is the rational way of making these decisions. So to go back to the cog lab that we did, if a card is textured on one side is P. It must have a cow on the other. Whoops. Cow on the other is Q. So what do we check? Textured on one side is P. We need to check P. The first card that is correct is the textured card. We want to flip it and make sure that there's a cow on the other side. The other one we want to check, if Q is cow on the other, we want to check not cow on the other side. So we want to take a look at the cards there and say, well, which one is not cow? Well, goat is not cow. So we want to flip goat and make sure that it is not textured on the other side. If a card has salt on one side, it must be pink on the other. If a card has salt on one side, if P is salt on one side. So we want to check P, we want to check salt. Make sure it's pink on the other side. And then if a card has salt on one side, it must be pink on the other. Pink on the other is Q. Correct way to solve this is to choose not Q. So we look for the colors and we say we're going to choose not pink. So the correct one to choose would be purple. And this works for any rule that you have. If a card has a P vowel on one side, you check P, you check that vowel. It must have a Q even number on the other side. You check not Q, you check the odd number, the 7. And then you can see that this matches up with our understanding when we apply to thematic rules. If a person is drinking beer, if you're at a party and you want to make sure that this rule is being enforced, you need to check the ages of people drinking beer. Those are one of the groups that you need to check. So if a person is drinking beer is P, we check P. That person must be 21 years or older. We know that we don't need to check anybody who's over 21. They can drink whatever they want. They can drink tea, they can drink beer, they can drink whatever they want. The only person we need to check is that 16-year-old, the not Q, the not 21 or older, and make sure that we turn their card and they are not drinking beer in order to follow that rule. If you ride your bicycle after dark, riding your bicycle after dark, that's P. You must wear reflective clothing. So we check rides bicycle after dark, make sure that person is wearing reflective clothing in order to keep them safe. And then we don't have to check the people wearing reflective clothing. They can wear it at night. They can wear it during the day. There's no rule on when you need to wear reflective clothing. The person we need to check is the not Q, not wearing reflective clothing, and make sure that they are not riding their bicycle after dark. And then finally, if you work overtime, you must be paid extra. Working overtime is P. So if you worked overtime, you check your paycheck and make sure you were paid extra. But if you're paid extra, you don't have to check if you worked overtime. In fact, if it was bank error in your favor, just walk away with the money. But when you need to check is when you were not paid extra. So if you are not paid extra, you need to ask yourself, hey, did I work overtime this week? And if you did, the rule's been violated. So you need to check not Q, not paid extra, in order to solve this particular rule. So for the conditional, what we actually do, we should check P and not Q. What it turns out that we actually do is we check P. We're good at checking P. We're good at everything sounds wrong today. We're amazing at checking P, affirming the antecedent. But the mistake that we make is we also check Q. Typically in descriptive reasoning, what we do is we'll take a look at the Q card and we'll say, all right, we'll check Q, and that is the error of affirming the consequent. We affirm the antecedent, that's good. We then affirm the consequent, that's incorrect, because when we take a look at the blue card, as we've seen before, if we flip it over and there's a consonant, doesn't violate the rule. If we flip it over and there's a vowel, doesn't violate the rule. Whatever we flip over, it doesn't matter. It cannot violate the rule. So those are the errors that are typically made. So when people are given this challenge here, instead of choosing vowel on one side, P, and odd number on the other side, not Q, what they'll do is they will check even number on the other side. And that would be like checking if you worked overtime, and then also checking if you got paid extra, right? You don't need to check when you got paid extra. You need to check when you did not get paid extra to make sure that you did not work overtime. So that would be an error. So in these conditional syllogisms, again, if we are logical, normative reasoning is what we do. Descriptive reasoning, what do humans actually do? So if we're logical, we should accept certain things and we should not accept other things. So what do we actually are supposed to do? We should accept affirming the antecedent. You check P. We should accept denying the consequent. You check not Q. We should not do affirming the consequent, checking Q. We should not do denying the antecedent, checking not P. But what do we actually do? Well, under thematic conditions, our performance basically matches normative reasoning. So we check P, we check not Q, and we don't bother with checking Q, and we don't bother with checking not P. So under thematic conditions, under conditions of if you're drinking beer, you need to be over 21, we do that very well. We do that very logically. Our descriptive reasoning matches up with normative. However, under abstract conditions, the question is different, or the answer is different. Logically, same things occur. We should check P and check not Q. We should ignore the other cards. What we actually do, we're still good at checking P. However, the error we make is that we also check Q. We fall for the affirming the consequent error. And what we do not do is we do not check denying the consequent, which is checking not P, and we ignore denying the antecedent. So we get it about half right. We get it about halfway there. When we're under thematic conditions, under abstract conditions, we get things wrong. So under thematic conditions, we match up with what we're supposed to do normatively. We check the right cards, we ignore the incorrect cards, but under abstract conditions, our ability to use knowledge breaks down, and we end up checking one of the correct cards affirming the antecedent, but we also check that cue card. That cue card that tells us nothing. We make that error when we can't rely on world knowledge. All right, so that is the idea of conditional syllogisms. So let's kind of speculate a little bit here. So what can we do knowing this? Knowing this kind of result, knowing that our reasoning, and by extension, other people's reasoning, are better under thematic conditions, what can we do to improve our own reasoning? And the hint is when you're faced with an unfamiliar situation. So you're faced with an abstract condition, right? Unfamiliar situation. What can we do to improve our reasoning?
Create a scenario you are familiar with.
Okay, so you create a scenario that you are familiar with. Do you have an example of maybe that's a little bit putting you on this spot on that? But what would that do?
Something you think about it more naturally. So instead of how do you deal with the abstract, use the thematic. Act it out situation.
Exactly. So one way that you can help yourself when you're faced with an abstract condition, when you're in an abstract condition, you're in this situation right here. So unless you have some sort of formal logic training, unless you've been to a cognitive psychology class and your professor has told you, check P and not Q. Remember that going forward in your life. Unless you have that, then one of the ways to help you do the correct decisions is to take that abstract condition and somehow come up with an analogy that is a thematic condition. So if you can say, well, here's this new situation that I'm in, and I need to make an if-then decision. How can I reason about this? Well, wait a second. This new situation reminds me of that time when I forgot my books at home and I had to decide whether I was going to go back and get my books or whether I was going to run for the bus. Yeah, I remember that. And I remember what I did in that situation. So maybe in this new situation that I have no prior experience for, I can apply old situations to help me reason out, taking you from this abstract condition to this new thematic condition. So as usual, in cognitive psychology, Futurama has an excellent example of this. So this is from an episode where they went to a planet where there was an alien that was obsessed with Star Trek, the original series, and they barely escaped from the alien, but some of their friends are still stranded on the planet, and they need to come up with a plan on how to rescue.
This is wrong. We shouldn't have abandoned them there.
I don't know. I'm feeling pretty good about it.
I didn't want to leave them either, Fry. But what were we supposed to do?
Well, usually on the show, someone would come up with a complicated plan, then explain it with a simple analogy.
If we can reroute engine power through the primary weapons and reconfigure them to Melvar's frequency, that should overload his electroquantum structure.
Like putting too much air in a balloon.
Of course! It's so simple!
Okay, so overloading a frequency and reversing positronic structure are things that are very, very unfamiliar. And if you were faced with that decision and you had to decide, well, do we try that or do we not try that? You would have a very difficult time making that decision, partly because you would have to apply abstract reasoning and abstract thinking to this novel situation that you have no knowledge, worldly knowledge about. But if you can say to yourself or figure it out or get some, I guess, maybe advice from Bender, and you say, well, this plan is like putting too much air into a balloon, then all of a sudden you can start reasoning about it. And you can say, oh, okay, it's like putting too much air into a balloon. So we're gonna put too much energy into the guy. That's like putting in too much air into the balloon. And eventually he's going to get overloaded, like when the balloon gets too much air, and then it's going to pop, and then that's going to save them, and we're going to be able to do what we need to do. So you're able to reason about the complex abstract situation by applying a thematic analogy to it. So one of the ways that this is used very often in the real world. So I'll give you some real world examples from our society where this kind of reasoning has been used to convince people of certain things. Oftentimes, this is called analogical reasoning with a disanalogy. And anytime you're trying to convince somebody about something, you are trying to help this person reason about this particular decision, right? You're trying to tell them, hey, I have this new, as we're going to see real soon, I have this new product. And I want you to think about this product and apply reasoning to this product and realize that you need this product. And you start trying to explain it to them, and they're like, well, I have no idea what is, I don't even know what this product is. I don't even know what I would use it for. I don't even know what you're talking about. Very ineffective because you're asking them to do abstract reason. But if you can give them an analogy where you say, oh, this product is like this other product that you always used, but with a difference. That's highly effective because if you say, oh, my product is like a refrigerator, but it's portable, then all of a sudden they're like, hey, I know about refrigerators, but now it's portable. Hey, that's a great idea. So that sort of my product is like this, but with this helps a lot to get people to accept the new idea that requires abstract reasoning in order to think through. So I'll give you a few concrete examples from our society. So this is a gas car, and everybody knows how you fuel a gas car. You go to the pump, you take the nozzle, you put it into the gas hole, I guess. I forgot what it's called. You put it in the gas, I'm going to pronounce that correctly, gas hole, and you fill it up. And that's how you put energy into your car. When they were trying to introduce electric vehicles, there was a big amount of reasoning that needed to do, the consumers needed to do to go from gas-powered car to electric car. So one of the things that the electric car manufacturers did is they made the analogy to a gas car as close as they possibly could. And one of the ways that they did that was with the design of a lot of the chargers. So if you take a look at the chargers, the shape of that, the look of it, where you stick it into the car is very much like a gas-powered car. So you don't have to abstract too much. You don't have to think too much. You can say, oh, hey, this is just like refueling a gas car, but now you're doing it with electricity. So there's no reason that electrical charging plug had to be shaped like that. That is about as close as you can get to a gas nozzle without directly making it look like a gas nozzle. So that's one example of helping people reason by saying, hey, I'm going to give you this concrete thematic thing that you can use to reason about it, but I'm changing one thing. It's like a gas car, but now we're using electricity. I'll give you another example. Physical media versus streaming. This was one of the easiest sort of transitions, I think, that we've seen in our society. One of, not the biggest one. We're going to get to the biggest one in just a moment. One of those, and it was almost seamless because the way that streaming was pitched was that it was like DVDs. It was like renting a movie, but you never have to return it, and it starts instantly. So immediately people were like, well, I know what renting a movie is like, and I can start thinking about that and reasoning about that. But you know what? I really don't like having to return the movie. I really don't like the extra fees. And they're like, oh, hey, this is just like renting a movie, but you never have to leave your house. You never have to return it, and it's available instantly. And all of a sudden, streaming goes from this complex new idea, and it's not too complex, but basically humans like when reasoning is simple. And the simpler you can make it, the more effective it becomes. So streaming was sold as this is renting a DVD, but it's instant and you don't have to send it back. And just to kind of drive this point home a little bit further, we see Netflix up there. Does anybody remember that Netflix actually used to offer physical media for rent, for delivery to your home? So even when they started out, they basically started out with, "Oh, hey, we'll deliver you the stuff that you want right at home. Oh, and by the way, we also have this little streaming thing. You can check it out." And people eventually were just like, "Yeah, that's streaming is the thing to do." But it took that kind of analogy. It's like renting, but it's instant. It's like renting, but there's no late fees. It's like renting, but you can watch it whenever you want, in order to make that reasoning and that decision making easy. So I mentioned that this was one of the fastest adoptions, I think, of new technology in media, but it's not. I don't think it is the fastest. I think the fastest is still held by DVDs, going from VHS to DVDs. So if you have grandparents, you might know what a DVD or what a VHS is. So for those of you that don't know, this is what movies used to be stored on. So you would have a VHS and you would stick it into a VCR. And the VCR was always blinking 12, but this is how you would play a movie. And the speed at which VHS was dropped in favor of DVD, I think is, I would have to double check it because it's been a couple of years since I looked at this, but I think it's the fastest transition ever recorded for any sort of media. So the percentage of people that went from using VHS to using DVD and the time that it took them to do it was so incredibly short that it sort of just boggles the mind how quickly it was changed. And the reason is because people already had real world knowledge to draw on when they were faced with deciding about DVDs. And the real world knowledge that they had to draw on was the CD. It was the music CD. And there is a real strong psychological reason why DVDs and CDs are exactly the same size. You could have made DVDs whatever size you wanted. You had to make completely new DVD players in order to, put your play your DVDs. And in fact, in the early days of DVDs, you were taking up like only half of the DVD, right? And that's why they started putting DVD extras. They started putting behind the scenes, features to kind of increase the value of it. But they chose that size because of the CD. And if you take a look at how long it took people to go from vinyl records to cassette tapes, that took forever because there was no analogy. Nobody could really help them along and say, well, cassette tapes, they're a lot like vinyl records, except, they're portable. You can take them wherever you want. Let me get where'd my vinyl tape go? There we go. They're portable. You can take them wherever you want. You can listen to your music. You can fast forward. You can rewind really easily. It was hard to take the analogy from the record to the cassette tape because cassette tapes look nothing like records. They operate nothing like records. It was a hard jump to make to say they're just like records, but they offer you this because they're not just like records. They look nothing like records. And then the jump from cassettes to CDs was also a long process because, again, a CD is just like a cassette, except you can skip songs easier? I guess you could. There's portable. Yes, they are. You can put them in a Walkman and they won't skip. No, they won't. That's a lie. But eventually CDs won out. Eventually CDs, they were the better technology. Eventually they won out. So when DVDs came out and people were looking at their VHS tapes, and they were deciding whether to make the change to DVDs, they had already reasoned through the change from tapes to CDs. They had already seen that change. So when people said, well, hey, a VHS compared to a DVD is just like a video cassette, except you can take it anywhere. You can fast forward it. It doesn't matter if you drop it in the water. Basically, it's like the difference between a cassette tape and a CD. And everybody had already gotten that world knowledge. So when the decision came to make the change from VHS to DVD, everybody was on board. And the speed at which people left their VHS machines and tapes and switched over to DVD was, I think, the fastest in the history of physical media. I'll have to double check that. But if not the fastest, then top 3 for sure. So again, that just kind of shows you the analogical reasoning. Find an analogy with a theme that your audience understands and has already accepted. And you are halfway there to convincing them already. So again, if you know your audience, find the world knowledge, the themes that they already have reasoned about, and then you walk up to your audience and you say, oh, hey, you guys are into mountain biking? Well, my new product is just like mountain biking, except with this. Or, hey, you guys are into macrame? Well, my new service, it's just like macrame, except like this, right? So you guys like online learning? Online learning is just like being in person, except you get to do it at home in your pajamas, right? Like that is the way that you allow people to reason easily about the stuff that you're presenting. All right, any questions or comments on that? All right, then that is all that we have for today.